Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time, at last, I'm speaking to Ace and Champ from Stellar Future Radio. Hey guys, thanks for speaking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, man. It's a thrill to be here.
And we're using pseudonyms today, people.
Yeah, I don't think I would ever be cool enough to actually be named Ace Rockwell when I was born.
You never know. You never
Yeah,
know.
no, I'm sure in the future it'll be a common name, but there may actually be an actual Ace Rockwell somewhere out there, and that's their given name.
Have you ever actually thought of placing yourselves in those pseudonyms actually into the show out of interest? I've just thought of this, of like just in passing, if the character of Roy mentioned something including two characters named Ace and Champ Rockwell.
That is it's funny you should say that because we do make an appearance here and there in the show, and it's not readily apparent unless one, our pseudonym, and
Yep.
then two, you're watching very closely. Yeah.
Yeah, recently we even featured a bit of research that Roy does to the initial programmers who created the news allocator programs,
Yep.
who are, long since dead at this point. But we also had plans. We have plans too of making cameos in other episodes upcoming. But the closest I would say is that bit of research that he does, and he sort of references these two underlings in the Stellar News Network that were assigned to create the original AI programming for the allocators, and the way that they looped pop references into the algorithm because they were chuckleheads. I think that's the note that he makes, is that, oh, these were my kind of guys, chuckleheads, and it's sort of made clear that they're not necessarily elite types, but are more goofy.
Yeah, and this might be getting ahead of our skis a little bit, but when it comes to the backstory within SFR, at least this is the way I see it, Ace, is we come together, we write the script, but then we spend time apart imagining and creating our stories and our part of the world on our own. And we have like different backstories. So it's almost like I call it like a Schrodinger's backstory, because we come up with as many different ideas as we can, and then we come together for our brainstorming sessions, and then our ideas kind of clash. We synthesize them together, and then we decide what the history is. So there's at least there's explanations for everything in the show, but there's at least one or two or three different ways it could go at this time, and it is like a Schrodinger's backstory, because until it is written and released, even we're not sure on what some of the things are or which way it's going to go.
It's like different universes, isn't it? It's like what one of you is the Hugh Jackman universe Wolverine, and the other one is the Henry Cavill universe Wolverine.
Yeah, the cavalry.
There's a bit, yeah. It's not far off from that. Yeah. The final product that we release is a synthesis of these two different backgrounds, and we do take note of what we're going to keep as canon, and we tend to stay tight-lipped on that to keep it flexible. But yeah, it did, and it came from two very different points of view, really. The background and the universe that I had was deeply steeped in a television series that I'd been working on for a number of years, where there actually wasn't any news radio. That was the sort of new element to it.
Yep.
But even with all of the work that went into that, then when we decided we were going to cover the news, it was a lot that it went from micro to macro, and I had to come up with histories for each of these moons and the asteroid belt and why they wound up the way that they did and what the people on each of them are like and this, that, and the other. And so even with a running start that I had, it once we decided that this was going to be the show itself, the template of the show was going to be the news. Yeah, we just sort of set to work on our own, and so then when we come together to put a script together, it tends to be from two different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's very much how could I explain this? The show it's a bit like, say things are going off in all these different sci-fi franchises and products that are going on, and then you got this person in a newsroom, essentially Roy, the character Roy, who then reports about these things that are going on in all of these different sci-fi places, essentially.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's both a blessing and a curse because we're never at a lack for material given the number of different moons, not to mention the different companies that have bought asteroids and set up shop on them,
Yep.
or space stations for that matter, and all of that. And whatever influence, whatever favorite little anecdote from an existing sci-fi, there can be some sort of version of that that fits into the universe. So there's never a lack of material going
Yep.
on, but at the same time keeping track of what Roy reports on so that we don't contradict ourselves later on, that becomes a larger and larger task the further we go.
Yeah. I can also see how both of you, I'm guessing, are steeped in sci-fi lore in essence, because I'll listen to things and I'll notice things that hint at different Star Trek franchise products, some Star Wars in there. I'm not sure if I've picked up on some Firefly here and there as well. And then all these other things that are sort of like almost sourced from and hinted at, as opposed to outright saying this is from there. It's hinted at.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's definitely something we include, and I was just trying to think of how to explain it because I personally want Stellar Future Radio to be something that people can listen to when they're vacuuming their house, doing the
Yep.
dishes, when they're at the gym, when they're mowing the lawn. So I really like to make it so that it's easy listening, right? But then at the same time, Ace and I really like to put in some details, some Easter eggs, and actually connect some stories that you think may not even be connected through a bunch of different episodes. So it rewards the people that really enjoy the content, might want to listen to it again, or are just like sci-fi nuts looking for new material. Because that's something I find is that a lot of the really popular and iconic sci-fi is like living on again and again and getting new iterations and new shows and new movies.
Yeah.
And it's harder to find. People are writing sci-fi and doing new things and creative things, but they're so hard to find. And that's one thing that I think Ace also would agree. We want to create a new kind of sci-fi that people can enjoy with a new feeling.
Yeah.
That definitely, yeah, was one of the objectives of to do a radio show, since such a backbone of sci-fi is usually your visual component, and obviously we don't necessarily have that visual component. But as far as making those little references to all the little sci-fis and the design, fitting them in such a way so that they do fit into the universe. And when obviously like the big ones, Star Trek, Star Wars, like you mentioned, the smaller ones too, it's for me, it's exciting. I like the idea of somebody listening to the show and recognizing a more obscure or one of their favorites that isn't necessarily one of the big wigs, and sort of they're coming on this journey with us because that was our target audience, would be science fiction fans, and realizing just how large a genre it has become, seeing is that people can own the media, whereas before your favorite show was on television and then it was gone and maybe you caught reruns, but now digitizing all of that media, we carry it with us throughout our whole lives.
Yep.
And so featuring it in something like Stellar Future Radio was an exciting element for me personally. I think Champ would agree as well. That more obscure reference, when it gets in there, they're in there, and when you recognize it, because you can gloss over it the first time, or you can get it the first time, you hear it the second time, you're like, oh wait, and then you spin it back, you're like, did I just hear that little sound effect in there? When it's I don't know, I think of it as a way of yeah, I'm like you, the show's creators, yeah, you recognize that weird thing, I recognize that weird thing, that's why we put it in. So it's a way to connect with our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, it's a while since, because it's a while since I last listened to it, because there's been no episodes for a while. But I think, for instance, I'm not sure if I remember correctly. I think you even got in somewhere in one of the items in passing about the original commander of Babylon 5, Sheridan, somewhere as well, I think.
Yeah, there is Gopal Sheridan is
Yeah.
a character that messages him. Yeah. And
That's a good ear. That's a good ear, Marv. Good ear there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Good, great catch. Great catch. Yeah, Gopal Sheridan, which to me, that's a combination of a friend of mine who introduced me to Babylon 5.
Yeah.
And the discussion that he was having with another friend of mine between Sinclair and Sheridan, who was the better leader, or not even, they weren't even discussing that, but I could tell that my friend had a thing for this character Sheridan before I even started watching the show. And then I got into the show because he introduced it to me. And so, yeah, it's with as many characters as we bring into the show who contact Roy or are doing things on the different moons or whatnot, we always have a chance with names. And it's not with Sheridan, it wasn't just the captain of Babylon 5, but it was that friend of mine that introduced me to the captain of Babylon 5.
Yeah, it was the Sheridan that jumped out at me, and I thought, and I caught onto that name. It just caught that bit of that geek side of me, shall we say.
Yeah, that's a great catch. That's a great catch.
So, show history then. What made you decide between the two of you to actually come up with an audio genre, essentially, back when you did? Because this started a few moons ago now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab first, Ace. I think so. Ace has a narrative project that I think was a TV show. I'll let him say that part. That takes place in the future, and he has spent probably a decade working on this story and kind of building out this story world, which became the genesis of Stellar Future Radio. And how would you describe it, Ace? I'm getting crossed up here. How the whole thing started?
It was I wanted to, and of course, when your imagination runs wild, you wind up dreaming up a show that would cost so many millions to produce, but you let your imagination run wild. But I wanted to have something with space fighter pilots that was funny and as action packed as all of your favorite space fighter pilot shows were, but instead of fighting for the light side of the force or the future of humankind, these huge grandiose themes that are in Battlestar Galactica and Star Wars and very nearly every space fighter pilot show you might have gotten into. I thought, well, wouldn't it be funny if they were out there dying for soybeans and bottled water, And so that was the show was centered around one base that belonged to one of the security firms, and it was a mishmash of Cowboy Bebop and MASH, a mishmash. Here I am saying mashing it. MASH, Cowboy Bebop, and Battlestar Galactica, where it's just another day. It's a job. It's a job that you wind up doing when the job that you really wanted sort of fell through, is that you can always become a security firm pilot, and life is cheap, and you get paid by the mission, you get paid by the what you did during, because everything's being monitored. And I was like, that would be a funny universe where your life is on the line constantly, but you're not fighting in a war. You're just a mercenary protecting product, essentially. Champ called up and he said he wanted to produce a podcast, and we discussed it. And science fiction came up because we're both big fans of it. And for the longest time too, it was a lot of elves and a lot of dragons. I know after 2000, fantasy was definitely the dominant genre.
Yeah.
And for science fiction and cyberpunk in particular, there wasn't a whole lot out there. And so we opted to go with that genre, and I offered up the universe that we had. But again, that show was centered around just one group of characters that worked for one of the security firms. And so the whole concept of security firms in the universe, that's all based on that. But once we went larger than that, we're like, we're going to cover the news of the entire outer colonies. That's what opened it up, so that we weren't just constantly, oh, this battle or that battle, or we weren't, necessarily featuring, the security firms come and go throughout the episodes. They're not necessarily a mainstay.
Yeah. And I would add that it started out, Ace and I used to work at a restaurant together, and that itself has a lot of stories have sprung from that as well. And the original backstory behind SFR came from that as well, because in the restaurant industry, at least in America, there's a lot of consumerism, right? There's a lot of capitalism. The employees don't really matter, right? The customers don't really matter. The quality of the food doesn't really matter, but everybody says it does, right? Yeah. What matters is the bottom line, like how much money are you making? This person needs to clock out 15 minutes earlier so we can save this much money. No, don't remake that food. Just send it out the way it is. And it was something that I think it's a part of human nature, right? It's part of us. And I think that satirizing it is important, to laugh about it, bring it to life, and really look in the mirror, but in a way that you don't hate yourself and society for it. So the idea of capitalism and consumerism was part of that. And then also the idea that we both went to film school and we are screenwriters, but we have no budget. I have not written Deadpool 4, but I will if somebody wants to offer. But we don't have the budgets to do these things. And podcasting was an avenue that allowed us to really flex our muscles and show what we're doing as writing. Because it's fun to write screenplays, but it sucks to not ever have anything produced. So those two ideas combined with our love of sci-fi is where we met together, and we're like, this feels right. This is the direction we want to go in.
Do you think because you're doing it as a podcast, as an audio thing, where even without the budget, do you think that's allowing you both to actually be a bit more creative in a sense? Because it's almost the fact of, oh, we'll do this, but there's no way we could afford to do that in live action or in any other way. So we'll do that, and we do that. And it frees you up to be more creative, essentially.
Yeah, I would agree to that, definitely. It is a challenge. It's a challenge to do any sort of audio drama with just the medium of sound. And then with science fiction being so visually charged, usually, it is sort of like having one hand tied behind your back, but at the same time, not only, it doesn't matter how large, if we describe a jump gate being collapsed because a space pirate dropped a bomb on their way through it to escape a heist that they were a part of, how would we ever get across the finish line with something like that and have it have merit and not just be picked apart for how cheaply it was put together? And we can just describe it as you would be listening to it on the radio in that future. And so we're able to bring the show all the way across the finish line, which is very invigorating. You can spend half a year shooting a short film and then maybe get it into a festival, or you end up uploading it somewhere and it gets a couple of views or whatnot. But with the podcast, it doesn't matter how grandiose we want to make the story. We can always just describe it and just keep it limited to how a news radio personality would be describing it. So yeah, I think it definitely freed us up.
So you've got the general idea of the show of what you're going to do, and then so from there nailing the script. What do I mean? I mean by it explains exactly what I'm on about. Do you both sort of come up with ideas separately, and then you meet up and then say to each other, "Oh, I've had this idea," and then you sort of get all these ideas together, and then build from there? Or is it a lot more two people in a room banging out ideas?
I would say we have decided on the larger parts of the show, right? It's like a cross between CNN meets Futurama meets
Yep.
meets Blade Runner meets Family Guy jokes, right? We agreed. We're like, okay, it's gotta be this. It's all our influences. And
Yep.
then we purposely go in different directions and write our own stuff because we enjoy the chaos of creativity.
Yep.
And so we'll come back and then we will hammer things out together and we riff off each other's ideas. And it's actually a lot of fun for us. That's one thing I'm really thankful for with Ace is that we're great at brainstorming and building off of each other's stories. So the way we actually approach script writing is we'll split the stories in half, right? Let's say there's 11, 10 storylines in one episode. We'll just split them down the middle and we'll write. And then once they're written, we'll come together and have it out.
Yeah, we'll hammer them so that they're coherent with each other. But not only does it, not only does that allow us to have separate stories that we bring to the table, that which it's two people dreaming these stories up instead of agreeing initially on each one, but also the tone becomes sort of this middle of that place between Champ and myself, whereas if it was just me doing it, I think it wouldn't be as good because it would be more hung up on descriptions of the universe and the history, and it would be a bit darker, to be honest with you, and it wouldn't be as much fun to listen to. And so Champ pulls me closer to that lighthearted side, and then sometimes he'll come up with ideas where in the universe in my head I'm like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Like, how would there be an entire asteroid for marijuana and vaping, and people would just go there for the weekend to get high? Like, I never imagined that, but that ends up being a great idea. And like
Yep.
the universe gets goofier as such, and a little idiocracy gets mixed in there as well, where it's just this autotronic kind of universe where even idiot human beings manage to live an entire lifetime because there's machines keeping them alive, and they get ferried off to different vacation spots and this, that, and the other. And so it winds up tonally, not just the nature of the stories being different, but the tone of the show winds up being the synthesis of these two differing perspectives.
Yeah, and to go back to something you said earlier, Marv, we definitely, the fact that it is audio drama, it allows us to have really wild ideas.
Yep.
Like the like the aforementioned, the one Ace just mentioned right now, which is the planet of the vapes, as we call it. It's from season 2, actually. And it's like an adult Disneyland where people can go and smoke weed, and it's like a weed themed amusement park. So we were able to just imagine that, let our imagination run wild, and not have to worry about what special effects would cost, or this would cost, or animating it would cost. And so it's gonna be pretty wild. But yeah, that's a season 2 nugget right there.
Yeah. Although I mean, I can imagine in animated form, that being a planet that the characters from Futurama walking through, and there'd just be all these people just there stoned out their heads like, hey man, and they're just walking through all these people just sat doing nothing.
Absolutely, yeah. The whole place is plush
Yeah.
walled, and you can take a nap anywhere, pass out anywhere. There's these giant teddy bears that walk around and pick people up and take them to their rooms when they fall asleep. And yeah, it is very Futurama, definitely.
Yeah, that one definitely is. And one thing when we were brainstorming, we were thinking about in general people that get high,
Yeah.
roller coasters aren't generally something people like to do, right? It's too active, it's too stimulating, it's too loud. So
Yeah.
the actual only real roller coaster at the Planet of the Vapes is at the very beginning when you go into the park. That's the only roller coaster that's there. Otherwise, once you're in there, there's all different kinds of like sensory and different activities for people that like to chill, man. You know, there's a petting zoo for sure. There's a guess the strain. Yeah, there's all kinds of good stuff.
Yeah, it wound up being one of my favorite sponsorships for the episode in season 2. But again, it is that synthesis of these two different perspectives, because in my mind, I had it where it's okay, life is really hard in the outer colonies and things are so expensive, and like I said, life is cheap. And so it was much more of this dog eat dog struggle to survive place. And there are elements of that in the show, absolutely. I mean, the security firms are a great example. These organizations, that used to be the security branches of the different mining conglomerates that were mining the asteroid belt and making billions of dollars, and then they started fighting each other for more territory in the asteroid belt. And so these security branches ended up becoming these mercenary militant branches that were at war with each other, and writing a whole history for that.
Yeah.
And when that battle, when the mining offensive came to an end and it was made illegal for mining corporations to have these advanced security branches, so then the security branches just went independent. And of course, they had lifetime contracts with the mining companies that created them. And so it's really just the same, which is I feel like a loophole that would exist in any sort of government on the planet, where it's okay, this legislation's passed where you can't do that, but they find a way to do it anyway. And that's, and so again, this weird sort of violent space fighter pilots killing each other for rocks essentially exists alongside Planet of the Vapes in the outer colonies. And that's one of my favorite when I revisit what we've done and when I work on what we're constantly working on. The tone now, I can't imagine it any other way. I would really not like a podcast that was just that stuff, just the stuff that I was pushing, and none of the other stuff. Like now it's so much more fun because yeah, we can attempt to punch you in the stomach with something sort of dark, but then at the same time there's all these goofy other things going on, because the human race is both. So, and as we evolve, we're going to take the bad components with us, and we're going to take the good parts of humanity with us as we go into the future.
It sort of reminds me that you're saying there of I'm imagining it being almost along the lines of when I used to be in bands back in the day, and I was writing material and I was co-writing with somebody or something, and I'd come up to them, or I'd go around to their house, and I'd be playing something to them that I've started on, and then there'd be this moment where quite a few times where I'd be doing something, or he'd be doing something, the other guy, and then suddenly the other person would suddenly go, "Oh, do you know what would be really good? Would be that's great, but imagine it with this." And there was those sort of moments when I was writing music, and that made it work better when I was writing with somebody else for that, because of that and those moments. And I'm imagining you two being the same, where you'll be listening to each other's ideas, and the other one will suddenly go, "It'll be really cool with that. That's a great idea, but put this in. What do you think of this?" And I'm imagining you two being a lot like that.
Yeah, definitely. And there is I feel like there's a lot of darkness in the show itself, but we hide it between some humor
Yeah.
or in references and things like that. Like the first thing I thought of when you were talking, Ace, was there's like a retirement home in orbit of the moon of Rhea,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the families never go visit the older people that live there. So there's actually a social program where they will pay a stranger to go to the retirement home and pretend that they're someone's relative because they have dementia or different levels of memory loss. So they'll go and just pretend to be someone's relative. And that is funny because it is like a part of human nature, right? How when people get older, you just their family ignores them, sadly. That, and then what else did I write here? Oh, there's a commercial for a dream recorder. I think it's
Yeah.
like episode 5 or 6, right? The dream recorder. And it sounds really cool, right? Like you're going to record your dreams, you get to see all the cool stuff that happens. But the dark side of that commercial, too, and the implication is that whoever that company is, future Google or whatever, they're recording your dreams and they're going to manipulate you with them, and they're going to put advertisements to suggest that you buy this or buy that or think this or think that. And that is also very dark, I think, and it touches on things that are happening today. So I think it's just we are very dark, but we try to find humorous ways to share it.
Yeah, it is. It's a synthesis of the two different starting points. I remember when an exercise that we did at the beginning just to see where the hell we were both at was, okay, let's both write an intro to the show and we'll just see how far apart these two perspectives are. And it was like oil and water. Like I remember I wrote something where it was very much like this judgmental AI that was talking about how meaningless a human life is, or I mean, the AI didn't necessarily say that, but my point is that it was just something that would never exist in Stellar Future Radio as it is today, because we eventually got to this middle ground, and that's where we do the core of our writing now. But at the very beginning, yeah, it was the two starting points were miles apart from each other. And so it's funny because whereas putting those sorts of messages into the work was always so important to me, and when I think of the show, I'm like, oh, it's so much goofier than I imagined it in the beginning. And then Champ points out those couple of examples, and I have to shake my head. Yeah, you're right. It is, the show is pretty dark, actually. It's not even the parts of it that I purposefully try to make dark. The weird satire comes out. Yeah, people being hired to pretend to be somebody's kid, and the older I get, the scarier that seems.
Yeah, but then it's carrying on a legacy from what a lot of sci-fi was and still is to some degrees anyway, which was almost a reflection of what our times are now. You watch old original series Star Trek, and how can you believe that some of the executives didn't realize that there's a lot of episodes about anti-racism and all these things in there? And so yeah, it's always been a reflection of the times anyway, a lot of sci-fi.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's been a mainstay of the genre itself. It's always been, let's take the issues of today and project them into the future. And it's a little bit of wizardry because, like you were saying, the execs that these sorts of themes of racism and sexism, making a statement about that, but you show them a spaceship and you show them some aliens, and they're bedazzled with what's going on, and the core of the statement floats by them. Anybody that would say no, I don't want this show to give a lecture on anything. The genre itself always has a lecture in it, even in the funniest stuff, even in stuff like Futurama. There's messages in that
Yep.
all throughout. And so you can't really create. I think the farther you get away from that in modern science fiction, or it's funny because you either are heavy-handed with it and it sticks out like a sore thumb and people don't like it as much when you're getting beat over the head with a message like that, or if you create something that is all just, fun and games, and you have some sort of vague statement about classism or something in it, and it's like the ruling elite, but the whole thing is really just gimmicks, and you're not really making a statement. That doesn't sit well with audiences either. The audiences tend to flock to the science fiction that does walk that fine line between a lot of bedazzlement and a message at the same time, and the message being something more than just, oh, the rich versus the poor, or good versus evil, or something like that. When they illuminate the nefarious nature of something else, and the solution is within yourself, that's the science fiction that lasts a lifetime. That's why people buy the Blu-ray sets of Star Trek, even though it is however many decades old at this point, and it still has aged well. Even when you've got, like, I remember in the first season of Star Trek or whatever, the doctor pulls in like a booze cart and mixes the captain a martini. I remember that because it was the 60s, and I'm like, there are these bits and pieces that are so apparently in the past, and so you have a laugh about that, but at the same time, the core of what was being said in that show is timeless, and we're still dealing with a lot of these issues that Gene Roddenberry wanted people to talk about.
Yeah, and I don't know if this will add to what we're talking about, but I'm feeling it. Like when it comes to genres of movies or TV shows or things like that, the entertainment and the mass media we consume in a lot of ways is the way that in a macro sense we process reality, right? It's like the stories we tell ourselves to get through things or to understand things as a society. And last century, it was at the beginning more cowboys and Indians, especially in America, right? They were coming to terms with the things that happened during that time, and they were processing it through these movies with Clint Eastwood and John Wayne, and directed by Henry Ford, and that was the way to tell stories and figure out what was going on. And then with World War II, which was a huge, horrible, sad event in a lot of ways, there was a lot of processing done there. You think about film and Italian neorealism and the war movies that came after that. It was like, how do we as a society process these things that happen to us? And what's interesting now is that science fiction, I believe, has taken over the place of the cowboy and Indian movie, or even the war movies and things like that. And so it's just an interesting idea to juggle around, because I feel like that's where a lot of the exploration of who we are as a society or as humans or whatever is happening in science fiction now.
Yeah, I would agree to that as well. I think one of the things that has to do with it is the exponential advancement of technology at this point. However many decades that we had rotary phones sitting in the kitchen of a house, and then you had more than one, and then one day you got your first cordless phone. All of that is 5 times longer than the amount of time it took us to go from a Motorola flip phone in our pocket to smartphones, which are essentially computers in our pockets that now people watch like televisions. And that all happened in a fraction of the amount of time that it took us to get from the one telephone to the cordless phones. And with that constant sort of on a subconscious level, I think it becomes overwhelming, because we wind up unable to imagine what the future will look like. And when you want some sort of escape from it, but at the same time you want a story that sort of takes you by the shoulder and says, yeah, you're not the only one that feels overwhelmed by this, you wind up watching something that's science fiction, and it's relieving to know that you're not the only one dealing with whatever anxieties you have. Oh, this feeling that everything's falling apart, or that everything is worse now than it was 20 years ago or whatever. And so science fiction lends itself to that, because who doesn't like to imagine what the future will be like, and at the same time want to feel like they're not the only ones dealing with whatever anxieties they're dealing with.
Wow, we're going deep here. Going deep, deep, deep. Acting then. How did you decide that Ace would be the voice of Roy and the other voices as well in the show? How did you get those?
In all honesty, it was lack of budget and my own ego, to be honest. We'd been working on it, I don't know, for only about a month before I thought, gee, I want to be the voice of the main character. I could have fun with this. And like I mentioned before, the first time we talked, I thought it would be a chance for me to uh pay homage to Max Headroom, which is one of my favorite characters in television history. And at the same time, it made sense because we knew that hammering out the voice of Roy was going to be a long process. And if we brought in a voice actor for it, then that would, and we didn't have anything to compensate them with. If we wound up recording the pilot episode 8 times and discarding 7 entire recordings of it in order to find the tone that we were going for, then I feel like Champ and I were both more willing to put one of ourselves through that than bring on somebody and have them go through that. So, like I said, it was like convenience and a bit of my own ego. And then as far as go ahead.
No, I would agree with that. I think part of it was that we wanted to keep full control of the show, not so much in like we have to make every decision, but as far as like how much of the IP we own. And we had a bunch of people, we had several people that were interested in investing in the show, and but that also meant that they wanted a slice of control as far as deciding how things went, and we weren't really in a position where we wanted to do that at that time, and we wanted to run as on a shoestring budget as little as we could, so then we wouldn't be beholden to other people, which is one of the reasons we wanted to do a podcast in the first place, so we could be fully creative. That was part of it. And then, like you said, Ace, definitely we weren't sure what we wanted, so we knew if we hired someone, especially to be Roy, that they were going to have to go through a lot to get to where we wanted to be, because it was going to be a very long process. It was a very long process, and we felt that Ace and I actually have a very good working relationship as far not only creatively, but when we don't agree and even when we disagree, we're pretty good at it actually. And bringing somebody else into that equation what's the word? It might be a little bit more difficult to have candor and be honest, or people don't always work with you in a way that lends itself to disagreement, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's already taken us as long as it has to get ready to create to record the second season, and that's just with 2 of us making the decisions. And we knew earlier on, it's like the more people we bring on that we need to make happy with what we're doing, the slower the process is going to be. And we hammered out the first season for, I don't know, I think if you don't count all the months of development, it took us just a little over a year. But if we were incorporating more people into the equation, then it would have taken longer, and we were eager to get something out there. So
and with that said, I am excited to see how season 2 goes, because just like I mentioned before, some of these decisions we make are a little bit of a Schrodinger's cat, right? So when it comes to voice acting, I know that we are open and interested in looking at other avenues this time, but since we're still writing, we haven't really brought our minds together on what that's going to look like. So I'm interested, but I think it's going to be a little bit different. I think we're going to open it up a little bit more.
definitely, that was one of the decisions we made, is that some of the feedback that we got on season 1 was that a lot of people's favorite moments were when Roy is conversing with somebody else, or when they hear a different voice other than his, which makes sense. He says a lot, and it can be, you're getting hammered over the head with the one voice. And so in that first season, it was reaching out to actors that I knew, and then going up to their place and pulling out the microphone and running the scene. And we had those moments where we heard another voice. And sure enough, when we got that feedback on season 1, like I said, people liked when Roy was conversing with somebody. And so we were like, all right, well, we need more of that. But instead of writing and recording and producing all at once, we're going to get the scripts done first. And then that way the gathering of different voices and incorporating them into the episodes will be made easier, because we'll only be recording at that point. So
those moments are interesting in another way as well, because sort of I was going to go with something else, but then when you mentioned the other people and the listeners interacting and letting you know, they were basically saying to you about the interaction between the character of Roy and these others, it's made me think slightly differently about what I was going to say, so I'm thinking what's interesting there is that the way that the affectation that you put on Roy's voicing is interesting, because there's very much a Max Headroom AI sort of feel to it in a sense, but that's added to when you have those moments when he's interacting with others. The way that I don't know whether you're doing it on purpose or not, but it's almost like I can sense, you can almost hear in Roy that it's almost like he's computing that information and then responding in essence at the same time, if that makes sense.
yeah, that's actually what we were going for. Sort of the mythos behind the allocators is that they were designed to interact with humans as one of their specialties. And whereas in this universe, there are plenty of AIs that never speak to humans, and others that did and then choose not to, or whatnot, or whatever, the main function of the allocators is to always be modifying themselves based on their interactions with humans.
Yeah.
And even in as much as the CDA is recording or monitoring, I should say, monitoring the reactions that people are having to the news and redirecting Roy to deliver other stories, that is emblematic of how competitive the news market would be in the future, is that they're employing machines to monitor what humans are listening to and how they're reacting to it, and then redirecting and charting a different course to keep people engaged. And in those times where Roy speaks directly to another human, not only does he have the AI has its programming to maintain its personality as it has modified it to this certain point. So there has to be a little bit of attitude there, but at the same time, each conversation has a goal. And there is a certain amount of time that Roy wants to take to obtain that goal via this conversation that he's having with a human being. And so, yeah, they are the CDA and Roy itself are monitoring the inclinations in the voice of the person that they're listening to. And it was very difficult to do that and make it sound natural. Fortunately, we have a really talented sound engineer that, through little delays and bits of sound effects in there, I'd say most of what you detected was his work, Akatronic's work in editing it.
Yeah.
Because even when I was recording it, it was like, this is going to be difficult, because again, it's the calculating power that makes an AI, that's their superpower compared to humans. It's being able to cross-reference data that AIs can do faster than human beings, and trying to incorporate that into the performance was really either it stuck out, either it was obviously what we were trying to do and it was awkward, or I wasn't doing it at all, but we used the editing to fix it. So it really was mostly the editing that is what you're detecting.
So the performance, is that skip forward to this then. So the recording then, is that you, does the person who does the mix and the editing, are they involved in the recording of it as well? And are you involved with the recording as well, Champ?
So yeah, that's a great question. It's evolved over time. So before it was Ace and I were like, okay, this is what we wrote. This is how we want our Roy to sound. This is how this scene needs to go.
Yeah.
And we were very hands-on, but over time it has really changed. We're really lucky to have the audio engineer that we have, who is actually a friend of ours, who has a lot of experience with audio editing, and we were really lucky to have him on board with us on this. And over time, it has turned into essentially, excuse me, I feel like Accutronic deserves like some director's credits with this too, because he and Roy now, he and Ace do the recording together.
Yep.
And a lot of the notes and ideas that Accutronic has and he does with the show is just amazing. Like, we're really lucky to have him.
Yeah, absolutely. Because he is, when we got the software wired up together, it was a matter of what glitches we had written into the script and how he was going to construct those glitches. And so he would be in on the recording to make sure that we were getting decent levels, and I couldn't monitor what was going on in the background either. And so we needed someone there to catch if I was staying on script and if there was some sort of dirty audio, a helicopter flying overhead or something like that. And so it started with him monitoring that to make sure that we got clean audio. And then he started having suggestions, and then he wanted to experiment with different glitches. And so he'd have me say one line in different ways, of more animated, less animated, angry, quiet, whisper, and he would construct glitches using those multiple takes. And so,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, he's definitely, we had all of these things in mind, but neither Champ nor I knew exactly how to do them, and he did. And then he got familiar enough with the character, and like Champ pointed out, he became a director in and of itself, because he's caught things that when I'm in character, I can't monitor my delivery and stay in character and have those moments where there's the AI computing going on at the same time. And so he does that in the editing.
Yeah, and I will
Wow.
add that one of the most sobering moments for me was when we listened to the first draft of the pilot episode, because Accutronic followed our notes to the T. He did exactly what we wanted for all the audio stuff, and then we listened to it. And it was horrible. We have horrible, horrible audio taste. It was boring. I played it for my parents, right? They're supposed to be the easiest audience, right?
Yeah.
Just the look on their faces, yeah, it was boring. And so he brings a little sprinkle of magic to the show, and he's helped us understand the craft, because it really is a craft.
Yeah. And as far as the glitches too, I was I was panicking when, for a second in my head there, I was panicking when the interview started, because I was thinking of like how many moons you had mentioned, how many moons had gone by since the release of season 1, and I forgot that we have spent a year building the material that we have in our Patreon, because we knew when we started producing season 2, we wanted to do that as efficiently as possible. And so creating bonus material while recording the main episodes and having them edited and then releasing them is what we were doing in season 1, and we just didn't want to do that again. So in building the bonus episodes, which are a little bit more liberating, because we don't need to stick with the news template and we don't need to stick with a certain amount of time and all that, created what he called the next generation of glitches. And he sort of showed them to us, that, and they weren't written into the script. And it was just proof again that because the three of us have been working together for as long as we had, that he was it was both he was understanding what we wanted, but he was also interjecting his own suggestions, and they were harmonizing with what we wanted because he was throwing in glitches at that point that we hadn't written into the script, and he was layering them on top of each other and everything. And I imagine that's because he's as talented as he is, and we weren't providing him with the challenges any longer, and so he started challenging himself. And there was a whole second generation of glitches, which is going to be featured in season 2, that make the ones in season what that just that component by itself is evolving thanks to him.
Yeah. The reason why I said wow a couple of times there is because it suddenly a realization came to me, because I was thinking, I've thought a few times listening to it, I've thought how amazing that Ace can temper his voice so well that it changes with each syllable every now and again. And now I've realized, I mean, I should have thought about it beforehand and realized what was going on. What's happened there is then, I'm guessing, is that Aquatronic, or whatever he's calling himself, what he's done there is he's taken these different takes that you've done of that line or whatever, and he's taken a bit from each one of those takes in a different emphasis and created that glitch essentially with the different voices, essentially from one bit to another, one syllable to another.
Yeah, we have moments in the script where that's what we want to do.
Yep.
But he's the one who puts that together. And in the beginning it was like, oh, I'll say it 3 different ways or whatever, but even with his direction too, it's been all right, the tone of this episode so far has been like this.
Yeah.
And we have implemented too. It was season 1 was Roy's inception. He comes into existence literally in the first episode.
Yeah.
And so he's building his personality throughout season 1, and then season 2, which takes place after an undisclosed amount of time after, he's much more comfortable. And what we're planning on is Roy leaning further into other personalities from the past that he's playing with at that point, because he's become more comfortable in his role. And so but yeah, the different inclinations, yeah, it literally could be just toning it down in the editing, or it could be slipping in a different take and then mending it to seem seamless.
Wow. So recording and then sound effects, are they all from Aquatronic as well?
Yeah, no, we had a subscription to a service. In the beginning, we had a subscription to a service that had a number of special effects. And as Aquatronic got more and more adept at editing the episodes together, he took it upon himself to start creating some of his own special effects, either using Foley tactics or computer tactics. And I wouldn't be able to point to as to which ones are which any longer. I know as season 1 went on, more of his own, we would keep telling him like, we found the special effect that we want to use. You don't have to go to it. He's like, oh, let me try something. And he'd come up with something, of course. Not only would it be original, but it would be better. And he'd already put the work into it. But we were trying to make it as easy on him as possible from the beginning. But he kept taking on more and more roles as we went.
Yeah, and I would add to that too. One of the things we're trying to do with Stellar Feature Radios, it is analogous to like a CNN or like old network news from the 60s, 70s, 80s. And so those news channels, they had the same sound, the dun 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 or whatever kind of song at the beginning, jingle they'd have at the beginning of their news shows, always the same. The breaking news sound or whatever is always the same. Yeah. And so there is a little bit of that as well. We don't want to have too many sounds. I think it's good to be where we are now compared to where we started, but we're also aware of trying to emulate the things that we are satirizing too.
So then the logo as well, where did that come from? Who created that?
Oh, actually, yeah, we hired the same friend of mine, Gopal, who introduced me to Babylon 5.
Yep.
It was,
Cool.
I should say, it was a friend of mine named Randall, and it was a friend of mine named Gopal. He was very versed in Babylon 5. So when I say Gopal Sheridan, that actually is a reference to the graphic designer that created the logo for us. He went into we attended school with him and were friends with him and still are. And he, I think 10 years ago, went into graphic design, and that was a real fun experience because we hired him at a massive discount. He can usually charge much more for his time than he did, but he was doing us a personal favor, and we went through this process of discussing all the different existing news networks and what their logos conveyed. And he put a whole slideshow together with, I think, up to six or seven different options from the starting point of which direction to go through. And I thought when we hired him, I thought when we brought him on for that it was going to be us just telling him what we wanted and him just creating it. And instead it was this real sort of exciting, fun. I got to feel like I was starting my own business, which I guess I was, but I guess we were. But this whole history of how graphic designers see the world and what is all being conveyed to us subconsciously in a logo. And of course, he saved the one that he felt the best about until last. And with an exception of a couple of his different suggestions, like I said, he had 6 or 7 different suggestions with color palettes and reasoning behind. And like when I came to number 3, I'm like, oh, number 3, that'll be the one. And then it was 5. Oh no, 5, that'll be the one. And then he saved the one that he felt the best about last. And when he showed that to us just as a sketch, I was like, no, that's the best one. And so his input and our input based on what we were ordering from him is what went into the logo.
Yeah, all I will add is that logo is delicious. I love that logo.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. The thing is that you've with both that and with the editor. I mean, it could have gone a completely different way in a sense. The whole editing of the show and the way that it looks through the artwork as well could have been completely different. But you've been lucky in a sense because both of those people are creatives in themselves. So they've been able to be just as well, add their creativity to this to make it almost, I'm not sure whether to say almost more than you probably initially imagined.
Absolutely. I wasn't even thinking about Champ put together a couple of clip art pieces.
Yeah.
And he was the one who came up with the title, Stellar Future Radio. And when it came time for the logo work, I was like, let's just go with the one that you made. Let's just go with the clip art one. What? I mean, that. And he was like, no, obviously not. And from the beginning, when Champ called me, he had me listen to a number of other podcasts. And then when we spoke again, he was like, mechanically, given who we know, is literally the words that he used. Given who we know, do you think mechanically we could be on par with these other podcasts? And I thought about, Acutronic, and like you said, with the creation of the logo and Gopal adding his piece and everything, that came later. But yeah, it was. And just like with Acutronic, sort of taking our, like, oh, this is what we're going for, and making suggestions that fit within that realm instead of barging in and saying, no, this will make it better, whatever. A working relationship through all these different personalities is, what created the aesthetic that we use on the website, the logo itself, the colors, all that was all through conversations that we had with Gopal, and then the sounds that have been featured in the bonus material. Again, like I said, that second generation of glitches and the input that Nick has had. When Champ asked, "Do we know the right people?" I knew without a doubt. I'm like, no, I know. There are so many talented people out there that, for one reason or another, didn't wind up getting to use their talents. Or, I mean, that's not even necessarily the case, because with the people that we work with, Akatronic produces music too, and Gopal is a graphic designer. But it's without a doubt that there's, with something that's exciting, something that people want to get on board with, that's sort of new, they'll bring their talents to it. And I look around at everybody milling around and wondering what talents are inside of all of these people that people don't even know about, because they don't get to show it. Because yeah, we've gone above and beyond what Champ and I could have done if it was just the two of us, without a doubt.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, or maybe gonna listen, or future listeners, every episode has every half hour has a specific sponsor to it. And for all of season one, we actually had professional logos made for each sponsor, and they're on the website. And I think they're in some other spots as well. Like the season one is just like the tip of the iceberg, really, when it comes to building the story world. And we have a lot planned. It's just a matter of getting it through the funnel. But yeah, those logos are really fun. And we show some of them on our socials, but they are on the website, and they're going to be definite future uses for them as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Zing ding bing. Casino Resorts. It's probably still my favorite. Oh no, I have to say Orbits is my favorite. Orbit, the evil empire, the largest mining conglomerate. We had a mutual friend, Kale, who created those logos for us, the sponsorship logos. And yeah, Orbits is still my favorite. But Zing Ding Bing is a close second.
Also impressive that you can say it without any problem.
Yes, actually, that was. I used to say that when back in the day when I was a kid, when I was in my 20s. If I lived with a bunch of smartasses, I wouldn't have had it any other way, and I am one. And so even if I would say something that was clever, my roommates wouldn't just laugh and say, "Oh, geez, you're so funny." They'd give me that look of like, "Oh, you think you're clever, don't you?" or whatever. And I would say back in those days, when they wouldn't laugh at something that I'd say, I just would add zing ding bing, and I'd forgotten about that. I had moved away from San Francisco at that point. I was living in New York, and when I came back to California or something, one of my friends he said, "Oh, as a good friend of mine used to say, zing ding bing," and that I was reminded I'd forgotten. I never said that once when I lived in New York, all the years that I lived in New York. And then a few years go by, and Champ and I create Stellar Future Radio, and we had a casino resort fleet out there, Carnival Cruise in Space or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to be called Zig Ding Bing. And I really want to get a t-shirt with that logo that Kale made on it.
I mean, we touched on this when you've both been on before and to do the Pods We Love mini episodes. And you've also sort of hinted at it earlier, saying that you both looked at certain podcast, sci-fi related audio shows that were around at that time. So what were the inspirations then for what you ended up doing?
Champ, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I mean they are many and varied inspirations. I think the aforementioned stuff, I think Blade Runner, Philip K. Dick is a huge inspiration, not just the Blade Runner stories, but a lot of the stuff that he wrote, Futurama, and the way that they look at the future in a hilariously dark way. Cowboy Bebop, Tron. I think from podcasting, one of our big inspirations was Welcome to Night Vale, which is still running,
It is.
huge
Yep.
like
Yep.
audio fiction drama podcast. It's great. It is like a community radio show that's just creepy and doesn't really give you any exposition. It just throws you in the world. That's a huge inspiration for us. And I mean, there's just so many to talk about. I mean, even things that were not sci-fi themselves, like the TV show Lost is science fiction, but that's more about ensemble.
Yep.
I definitely would add, I'd say that first week after Champ had called me and said, "Hey, what do you think about making a podcast?" He had me listen to Mission to Zix
Yep.
and Sayer, and I had already heard Welcome to Night Vale, but I listened to more of that as well. And those two became because I thought that both of them were massive successes, both of them in many different ways. And so when he asked if we could mechanically be on par, those were the ones that I was definitely thinking about. And like we mentioned the first time we spoke, Sayer wound up directing me to wanting the main character to be an artificial intelligence, albeit it's a very different AI than the one that's featured in Sayer. But that relationship between AIs of the future and human beings, and what sort of humor would come out of the juxtaposition between the two different species, essentially. Sayer addressed that, and that was something that I wanted to address in Stellar Future Radio, but in a different way.
So next then, so what would you say would be your top three sci-fi products? They could be television, film, or books, or anything. Champ,
Man,
the
gotta go with
deep
Star
end.
Trek. I think Star Trek's huge to me
Yep.
and for a lot of people. And I personally would say Next Generation is the show I've seen the most, but I think a lot of it is hugely influential. I mentioned Philip K. Dick before, and I think a lot of his pick the movies or the books or whatever, like all the stuff he's done from not just Blade Runner, but Total Recall, Minority Report, the movie The Adjustment Bureau, Next, the Second Variety. There's so much stuff that he wrote that has been a huge influence for me, like lifelong. I would say that, and then I guess a dark horse in my mind because I think of franchises, movies, action, but the books 1984 and Brave New World are actually really big influences on me as well when it comes
Yep.
to science fiction. And those aren't exactly fun, but they're important, and I think they make you think.
Yeah, I mean Philip K. Dick. There's this thing where people could read him, and I find that he's an incredible ideas person. It's almost like you read him and you think it's almost like he wants to. He's got that many incredible ideas in his mind of, oh, what if this, what if that, what if the other, that it's like he gets the idea out and then he's on to the next idea, and there's just so many amazing concepts that he came out with. What was the one that I read, for instance? I mean, he gives it away, but there was that story, wasn't there, where the character, he went to a planet or something, or went somewhere, and there was sort of like, was it Intruder or something? I think it was called, or something, where there was another version of him essentially.
Oh God, which one is that?
Or am I
He's
or am
so
I getting it
prolific,
mixed?
right?
It's the one where they tried to make it as a film with Gary Sinise of all people. I can't remember what the name of it was. I've never seen it. I've got it on my Netflix, waiting to watch it. I've had it there for years. I thought I've got to look at that because any idea I think that he came up with is an amazing idea.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, the movie Imposter, right?
That's it, Imposter. That's the one. Yeah.
I have not seen that movie actually. Yeah.
No. That's why I've got it on there. I thought if it's based on something that he created, I've got to watch it.
yeah. I mean, without a doubt, like if you were gonna label somebody as the the godfather or the grandfather of cyberpunk, it would have to be Philip K. Dick, because you read his stories and they sound like something that was written during the age of computers, and the so much of his work was before that. It's he's on par with writers who were publishing in the 80s and 90s, and yet he was doing it in the 50s and 60s and projecting that far in the future. And not necessarily, I mean, some of his works get hung up on details, gimmicky details of the tech, but so much of his other stuff is so poetic that it doesn't get hung up on the tech. You're left to try to imagine what a watch looks like in this time that he's describing it, or what the rifle looks like that the captain is carrying in the second variety. And because he leaves it up to your imagination, and then the statement of the piece is just so far-fetched that you're like, what was he channeling for him to not only daydream about a time where computer systems and machines had personalities and had independent thought, sentient, a sentient nature, but what problems would arise from that, how they would be treated. Automata, I remember that's a quintessential example of what sort of laws would be placed against these machines that we created ourselves, that modified themselves eventually in order to make ourselves feel secure from our own creation, and what sort of diabolical relationship that's all about when humankind creates itself, when we make babies and we have that relationship with children, our children, the next generation, all of that. But when we give birth to a different form of life altogether, and our first inclination is to fear it and then try to control it using laws and all that, and he's daydreaming these themes in the 1950s.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's without a doubt, like I said, if there's one godfather of the cyberpunk genre, it would have to be him. With that in mind, I guess I would add William Gibson to the list.
Yeah.
I love in his books the description of the landscape, and you can tell where his influences came from, but his own style of describing the landscape and the weird sort of human, at least Western components that would be added and modified and that would manifest in the future, which felt so believable and yet left me feeling gross. I remember the whole first chapter of Snow Crash is about the main character delivering pizzas, and the thing is that people order Papa Enzo's pizzas, and if they don't get there in 30 minutes, the company Papa Enzo's has to give them $10 million or something like that. And so people will purposefully order a pizza and set up all of these distractions and obstacles for the delivery person to not make it in half an hour. And the television networks will be there as the clock is counting down. Are they gonna get $10 million for having the pizza arrive 3 seconds after 30 minutes or something like that? That whole first chapter alone, I remember just being like, this is so terrifying to think of, and yet I could completely believe it. And so in the creation of Stellar Future Radio, Gibson was definitely in there, and his depiction of what the virtual reality internet would look like, and how people would live in it and all that, of all the different manifestations of that concept that have ever been produced, I have to subscribe to Gibson's over everybody else's.
Yeah, and I have two ideas to bounce here. One with Philip K. Dick, and in particular, the Ridley Scott Blade Runner, it feels like that has almost become ubiquitous as like an idea what the future is going to be, right? When it comes to music, to art, to video games, and even other movies that aren't Philip K. Dick movies. It has that aesthetic, that style, and I mean, it's a big influence on me too. But I also wonder if it may be in some ways overpowering other visions. That's one thing I wanted to throw out there. And then also when it comes to Star Trek, which is one of my favorite sci-fi of all time, when it comes to Stellar Future Radio, it's is not there, right? It's there a little bit. You can see it. It's around the edges. There is a bonus episode that kind of has some Star Trek stuff, but Star Trek is about exploration and the best of the best. And here's the best naval ship, the flying out there, and that's not reality. That's not everyday life, and that's actually a choice we made. That no, we want to talk about the nitty gritty. We want to have this sci-fi where you are living every day in this place. What is that like? In a lot of ways, it's new and it's different and it's fresh compared to today. But also, it's not, because it's human nature, and human nature never changes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, you mentioned yeah, that's fast. Just going on the sticking with the William Gibson thing. I mean, when I read The Peripheral, I found that a fascinating read as well. The way that Gibson writes in that as well, where he's got this incredible idea of the VR, that somehow or another they've realized that they're traveling through to a future version of London, essentially, because they thought it was a VR game, and that sort of creativity there in Gibson's writing is astounding, and also ahead of his time there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That, yeah, and you can see the fledgling moments of it these days.
Yeah.
Again, when we started creating Stellar Future Radio, there was no ChatGPT. The AI conversation still felt years and years and years away, and now here it is, and you can see the first stumblings of this virtual reality internet. And with Gibson's depiction, again, that's the one I subscribe to. I feel like that's the one that people will seek refuge from the real world in, and traveling just down this one main highway, but doing it at essentially being able to fold time space reality to be able to just travel down it so fast. And I have to agree too with what Champ said, with definitely like Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, based on Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, becoming this dystopian take, seems to have come back in full force, I think, in the last 10 years for sure. And like you were saying earlier too, it's this reflection, I think, of what we're going through and our relationship with technology, and on a subconscious level feeling inferior to it, or not ready for it, or just simply thrown into a state of anxiety over it. And so that more dystopian or cyberpunk view, as opposed to Star Trek's better. They even did. I mean, they even tried to do that with Star Trek. It was sort of a tragedy, like when they did Picard, the spin-off series, and they made everybody so miserable in it, and everything so dark. And I was like, oh no, not Star Trek 2. Like, not Star Trek 2. We have so many examples of this, which I do love, but feel more real because of the way we're headed right now, maybe. But it has, yeah, I think the decision's been made, or which one do we believe more? And that influenced, our decision making when we set to task on this podcast as well.
Do you think then that creatively these big sci-fi products like the Blade Runner, so you got Blade Runner, you got the Star Wars, you got the Star Trek, and also to a degree you've got like the alien look of the world as well, and again Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
So do you think there's almost a danger there, in a way where a lot of the more popular, or the ones that are that are being made, where they're putting the money into them, sci-fi, do you think they're carrying one of those for aesthetics a bit too much, and they're not being a bit more creative with the overall vibe or atmosphere of those worlds?
I think that like the bigger media companies are taking less chances. I went to the movies recently and it's like you get a preview for the next MCU movie, the next Alien movie. I don't even know what number we're on now with Alien movies. And then there's like another Transformers movie coming out. And so I feel like when big media companies, they are on a mission to make $1 billion, right? That's the goal. That's not, it's almost like the standard, right? If it can't make $1 billion, they don't want to make it. So they are going to retread and regenerate and redo the same stuff. They'll recycle it over and over and over. So I think that adds to the thing you're talking about, Marv. And I think that the creativity is in books, in podcasts, in the more independent spaces where people are experimenting and doing passion projects, but they are harder to find. And I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I thought.
Yep. So what other sci-fi properties would you have in your top three then, Ace?
Oh yeah, I mean it's funny to answer this now based on what we just spoke about.
Yeah,
Definitely Blade Runner I remember showing that to friends of mine when I was 12, 13, and them thinking I was weird for thinking it was cool, and me not being able to describe why I thought it was cool. I was too young to put into words. I just remembered that it that Blade Runner was set on this planet, not some galaxy far, far away.
yeah,
And that depicted just this miserable city um and that never having seen anything like that before. And again, like I was used to more fast-paced stuff, and I could tell, oh, this is a slow-paced movie, as I would say when I was 13, but just adoring it anyway. Beyond that, I wasn't moved again at that level until I was almost out of high school, and people would share around. There'd be one VHS tape with such and such a number of episodes of Cowboy Bebop on it,
yeah,
and you'd pass it around, and DVD players hadn't hit the market just yet, and you wouldn't know where if you'd be able to see the entire series from beginning to end. But given the people that I knew, I was able to see all of Cowboy Bebop, uh, albeit not in order. And that was the second time where I was like, oh, I could tell as an 18-year-old or 17-year-old, I was like, this is gonna be one of those projects that's gonna stay with me my whole life, because of the humor, that sort of surrogate family feeling that they had to it. And compared to Blade Runner, it's warm and fuzzy, but at the same time, it does depict, and obviously a massive influence on the podcast, what human culture will look like when it gets scattered to the rest of the solar system, not traveling to Alpha Centauri and not traveling to different star systems, but in this solar system, if we were to colonize these moons of Jupiter and the asteroid belts and all of that, what would it look like? And it'd be this hodgepodge of different languages and different cultures. And once a certain different culture got predominant in a certain area, they would sort of take over, and it would essentially be an image of Earth just spread out over a solar system.
yep,
And then finally, I'd have to add Dan Simmons' work, Hyperion, and the second one, Fall of Hyperion. Definitely those first two in that series. I've reread them a number of times now. In terms of influence on the podcast, because I could say I've read Dune more than I've read Hyperion, but now that I've been lucky enough to do the work and release something of my own, it's always interesting when you're sitting there and you're sort of in your college mode and you're absorbing everything. It's easy to say that that 2001: A Space Odyssey and Dune are your favorite sci-fi pieces. But when you knuckle down and you do make something, and you put it out there, it's fun to see which influences you actually borrowed from. And so I was surprised because it snuck up on me. I didn't realize, but when I started thinking about the nation of artificial intelligences and how they would communicate with each other and what sort of relationship they would have with humans and what would be their prerogatives, beings that don't need to be paid and they don't need to sleep and they don't care about getting rich and all that. And I borrowed a lot from Dan Simmons in those series. The techno core is what he calls it in that series, where all the artificial intelligences do their computing, and the relationship they have with each other, how they communicate with each other, how they communicate with other humans. That all got borrowed. So I'd have to add that to the list.
Yeah, I mean, Cowboy Bebop is actually more influential, I think, than people would realize in some ways. I think because when you look at something like Firefly, for instance, which is a well-regarded, if cancelled series, you look at something like Firefly, and I think there's a bit of Cowboy Bebop in that, because that's about humanity going to other planets and going to those, and it's got a very Cowboy Bebop vibe to it, not to the same sort of degree, but I mean, Whedon, dare I say his name, and Munir must have been thinking about that. That must definitely have been in their thinking at that time, because it was out before Firefly for sure.
Oh yeah. I was a fan of Whedon. I still am, actually. I should say. But I was in college when I remember, and this was in the days before YouTube, but he denied knowing about Cowboy Bebop. He denied knowing anything about it before he created Firefly.
Okay.
And I was sitting there and I'm like, that has to be a lie. I'm like, it has to be a lie. Or the same sort of ethereal story that was floating around manifested itself in Watanabe in Japan a few years before Firefly came into existence. That is possible. That does happen. But the thing was, whether if it's true or not, it's like Whedon was this sort of champion for kind of nerd culture at the time, which doesn't really exist any longer. Now nerd culture is very mainstream. But if you're going to be this spokesperson for nerd culture, and then you're going to say that you don't know anything about the most successful series at the time to be released in the United States, and for that series to have had a serious English dub, and for them to be released on DVDs, and those DVDs to be some of the best-selling DVDs that were released in each year that each one was released and all that, it's like, for you to deny that you know this, I don't know. But there are a lot of universal nodes in both stories. So I'm not saying that he's a liar. That's what I thought at the time. It doesn't matter now. It's been so long. But regardless, yeah, that concept of leaving the earth and what parts of your culture are you going to bring with you. And there's going to be areas of extreme wealth, and there's going to be areas of extreme poverty, and there's going to be this sort of lawless area where, despite there being a government, it's going to be so widespread out that government's not going to be able to monitor everything at all times. Hence, there's going to be this culture of bounty hunters or mercenaries, which is, again, what the crew of the Bebop became, and what the crew of Serenity became. Yeah, that was the name of the ship, Serenity, right?
Yep.
Firefly was just because it glowed on the back, but they became bounty hunters of a sort, or soldiers of fortune, after a civil conflict too, was the other thing. So yeah, a lot of the same notes were in both series. And I wish that Firefly had got another season at least, if not to go the long run, because it was fun. And particularly in the last couple of episodes, you started seeing more of the universe, and it was less about people living underground and living in impoverished areas. And you started seeing some of the glimpses of the wealthier areas. And it was like, yeah, he's taking his time building this universe, and I would like to see that unfold more. But it got canceled. We got a film instead. But yeah, my hats off to him for creating it at all anyway, because to do it live action and to make it believable. Recently, Netflix tried to do a live action Cowboy Bebop. It didn't work. I remember when they announced it, I'm like, yeah, we already had one, but it was its own thing, and it was Firefly. So
Yeah.
that's the tragedy of television and film, is that there's a lot of great ideas out there that don't get made. And Champ was saying too, it's the studios not wanting to take risks and narrowing their focus and just repackaging what has already been successful 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and just slapping the same logo on it, repackaging it, as opposed to risking something new. And I hope that the system goes back the other way again sometime, because that was a really great time. The 80s and 90s for television and cinema were widespread out, and studios were taking risks, and you had this gambit of different influences to carry with you the rest of your life.
I mean, really, the problem there for Whedon and Minier is that it was 2002 when Firefly came out, and essentially, when you went into the 2000s, you've got TV studios, film studios, and all of these other media conglomerates being more questioning and a bit quicker with the axe, essentially, and not giving the breathing space that they were giving to these products, or these IPs, as they want to call them. They weren't given that same breath or ability to grow that they had done in the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, they have their reasons. I don't know if it was because the internet was starting to blow up and they knew they were going to have to compete with it for entertainment. I don't know, but it ended up being sort of, yeah, things got the axe.
So, okay, so going back to the subject of your show, then, and I think everybody ought to check all of those things that we've mentioned there. In passing, though, I'll quickly say that I was going to, if I'd have come up with three, I would have come up with, one of mine would have been the Star Trek franchise. I'm a big fan of the original series, but I think, I mean, we could stay on this as long as you like if you know the show. I think there was something about when I watched is it the third incarnation of it of the live action version with Deep Space Nine? That was intriguing to me because you had the whole difference because they'd put a non-Starfleet character in there, in the Major Kira character in that, and she was female. I found that fascinating because you had the wanting to do things Star Trek way, Starfleet way, in a way, from the Starfleet officers, but she always put that little bit, and then you had the character of Odo, and there were these non-Starfleet characters that made it interesting, because you'd start with this idea, and then the way that they get around things is it was decided between all of these different aspects, essentially coming up with how these situations were dealt with eventually.
Yeah, Deep Space Nine was a massive success. If I am right in saying so, and I believe I am, I know that Ronald Moore was one of Roddenberry's go-tos during the making of The Next Generation, and he had been pushing for a different type of Star Trek for a while, set at a station, and like you were saying, honing in on a couple of long burning conflicts the Deep Space Nine did, and Ronald Moore was able to make it happen. And it had a completely different feel, and yet was still so comfortable in that same universe. And that was, again, it was like, okay, yeah, this is a widespread out future that we're in. And whereas we've always been on the bridge of one of the best ships in the fleet, now we're taking over this Romulan station, and we're saving money by not building a Federation space station out here in the boondocks wherever we are. And that was a whole different take on the same universe. And Akira, certainly with her relationship with the civil conflict that she had been a part of and that she was still a part of, that the treatment of her species by the Cardassians.
Yep.
She, again, I don't want to, it's too easy to say, oh, it's like a darker Star Trek, because it wasn't necessarily dark, and Star Trek has always been on a more upbeat note. But it definitely presented these things where it's okay, so here's some very human things. And unlike with Kirk and Picard, where we can solve a problem and then we pack up our ship and we leave, we're stuck here. We have to deal with these problems that are in this territory. And people their personalities are going to be affected by the things that have happened in this territory. And hence Odo's character and Kira. It was a masterpiece, quite honestly. And I'm really glad for Ronald Moore to be able to make that happen. Even if it did come, it almost derailed Babylon 5 entirely, but Babylon 5 got to be made too. So we had 2 space station series in the 90s.
Yes, that's a whole thing in itself, where people accuse the Star Trek people of basically stealing Straczynski's idea, which,
yeah,
I'm not sure whether I'm completely 100% agreeing with that, because they've said before that they'd obviously been developing Deep Space Nine, I think, for a couple of years before they started filming it. So that would have been before Babylon 5.
Yeah, they were neck and neck.
Neck and neck.
The odds that the Star Trek people got wind of JMS's vision and were like, "Oh, let's quick do our version of it." No, I don't buy that either. And quite honestly, with the exception of the setting being a space station, the 2 series are different, so different.
Yep.
One's built for the Star Trek universe, and the other one was a entirely different universe unto itself.
Yeah. So anyway, if somebody's thinking of doing an audio drama for themselves, what advice would you suggest to them? We've not heard from Champ for a while.
What advice? Oh my goodness. Yeah, know that it's a learning process, right? I think when you are writing your own podcast, right? Audio fiction, this is my idea. It's so great. When it comes out, just be ready to review and revise and keep writing, because writing for audio is different than anything else. And I think it's good to be humble, I guess is what I would say. And I wouldn't rush to produce or release. I think that, yeah, I feel like we're taking longer than we would like to release our stuff, but it's worth it, right? Because once it's out there forever. And the shows that we created back several years ago are still available for people to see and be introduced to the world today. And I feel that the fact that we took extra time to really shape them the way we wanted to makes a difference, right? Because there's more episodes coming out, so it's a better representation of who we are. So I know if I was going to do it again, just take your time, know that you're going to have to revise, and make sure that you're ready to release before you do.
Ace?
Yeah, I'd back that up. I'd say, like, you hit the nail on the head, Marv. Like, as much as you might want to assume you can do it all on your own, I recommend bringing on some other people, however many people that you need, because the waxing and waning of different ideas is going to create a better product. And you have to be willing to, we're always saying when we're doing the writing process, we have to kill our darlings. We throw everything that we want in there, but we have to fit it into a certain time. We don't want to chew the listener's ear off. And so you have to be willing to let go of all the things that you want to say. You need to develop the universe in your head 100% so that 10% of it will make it into your product, your graphic novel, your podcast, whatever it is. But Champ nailed it on the head. Just be patient and don't get discouraged, because it seems simple. I bet Marv could back us up on this. It seems easy. And then you start doing it, and you start tripping down this path of, if I do this, it'll be this much better. If I do this, it'll be this much better.
Yep.
If I do, and you start seeing all these things that you can do that would make it better. But eventually you do have to release. But then, like Champ said too, have your template put together so that when you get lost in your writing, you know where to go back to, what parameters work. Get as much, don't be in a rush, because the first few times that you hear yourself on the radio, the first few times that you hear yourself on the mic, you're gonna hate it. You just gotta stick with it, and you gotta figure out all the little growing pains and pieces. And then I swear, if you just stick with it, eventually you'll get to a point where you really like what you release, and you yourself will hopefully listen to it and be proud, because only you will know how much work went behind it. You won't cringe when you hear it.
Yeah, and I would bounce off of that too. One thing that we are continually that we realize and continue to realize and relearn, is that you will put your full focus into creating your podcast, whatever kind of podcast it is. You will put your full focus into it. Yep. But your listeners are not always going to put their full focus into listening, right? They're not just going to sit on the couch with headphones and stare at the wall like listening to your podcast. A lot of times they're going to be doing other things, and that's okay, right? It doesn't mean that your podcast is not great, but that's just the nature of podcasting. And so I think you got to keep that in mind, be okay with it. But then also when you write, you want to write with that in mind as well.
Wow, that's a great tip. That is a bit of advice. So with that in mind, what sort of podcast do you like listening to? I'm thinking of, what sort of podcast do you like listening to? I'm guessing that they've all got all these bits in place, all these good things in place.
I mean, first off, I got to say, pods like us, I listen to, and I think is amazing.
Thank you, Champ.
That's on there. That's on the list. We shouted it out on the SFR account too. So we really enjoy the show and listening to the show. So that's one. But on a personal note, I really enjoy improvised drama fiction stuff. Like, that's one thing I really like Mission to Zix, which I've mentioned before. There's actually a improvised Star Trek that is hilarious if you like Star Trek. That show ran from 2011 to 18. There's over 100 shows. It's really good. And if you want to binge something, it's there. But those kind, also history. I'm a big history nut. So history of Rome, history on fire. I just recently started a history on pirates, I think. I'm on episode 5 on a history of pirates thing, which is really compelling to me. But I take history like I do breathing, it's just the everyday thing where I'm just hungry for it.
I want you to send me a link to that. Can you do that in the chat that we've had going, Champ?
Yeah, the pirate one. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Ace, what do you like listening to?
I like analysis, honestly. I like radio dramas, the few that I listen to in order to get inspired for SFR, which I've already mentioned. And then I like analysis. I like finding the characters out there that I like their delivery. And obviously, if they're keen on the subject matter, listening to them review films of all different ages, all different eras. One recently that I've gotten into is Box Office Books. And it's like this niche sort of thing where it's these two sisters, and one of them reads a book that a film was made out of, and the other one watches the film, and they don't they don't both read the book and read the film or watch the film. So then they come together and they discuss how different the film wound up from being from the source material. And they've got fun analysis with that, and they've got great delivery. And so for me, it sort of reminds me of the old days when I had tons of roommates and we were all interested in the same thing, and we would wind up sitting around having discussions about movies and or books or genres or anything, and it sort of fulfills that need for me, listening to people's takes on different media that's been released.
While we've been talking, I did have a thought, but I don't know whether it's a stupid thought. I think I've mentioned to you both before about a show, a Megastar 7, is it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've listened to a couple of those. Yeah. Good call.
And I was thinking in my head, I thought, wouldn't it be really cool if one of your news stories just mentioned something that happened in an Omega Star 7, and then they somehow included that Roy talking about that on the news, on the show, on Stellar Future Radio, if they clips that into into a future episode of one of their own Omega Star 7s, because then you'd have that like almost back and forth of both of you having a nod at each other, or a bit of a wink, and also it'd be like a promotion of each other in a sense.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've looked forward to collaborating with others. And you can do it in a minimalistic way, or you can do it in a heavy-handed way. It would just be a matter of having that discussion with the other creators. But definitely, it's the thought has crossed my mind. I've wondered what it would be like if somebody who interviews different characters interviewed Roy, not me, but Roy, and what he would be like in an interview. So yeah, a crossover is definitely, as it grows and as we hear from other people, it's something I definitely would be open to. I don't know though. We haven't discussed it yet, so Champ might be completely against it.
Yeah, I mean, Omega Star definitely has SFR kind of sense of humor, so I think it would fit really well within that world, because just like the kind of sarcastic, cynical, just out there humor is something that I definitely identify with, and I think it's a great show.
It was just an idea that I had in the back of my head while we've been speaking. Anyway, so let's let people know what's going on with the show then for the future, and where they can get hold of you both.
Yeah, so season 1 is out now. There are 9 episodes, and that's available wherever you podcast, Spotify, Apple, all the things. It's all there. You can also find us at stellarfutureradio.com. And on the Twitter machine, on X, we are SFR_OC. And that's where we're most active. And it's definitely, we like talking with creators, not just podcasters, but people that write science fiction. And we just like to hang out and have fun on there. So we'll make fart jokes and talk about people's work and take a look at it and share ideas. So I would say that's where we are.
Well, we are. We're in that process of the next season, and we learned a lot from doing season 1, and we don't want to produce it the same way again. So we want to have all the scripts. That's why there's been so much time between, and more time than we wanted for sure. But it's a learning curve. But it'll pay off having all the written words down before we start producing it. It'll pay off.
Yeah, in season 2, I will commit to saying that it will come out before or after or during October of 2024. That's what I'll commit to. Before or after or during October 2024. But we definitely, with this ramp up to season 2, we've streamlined the way that we create content. So when it comes to like bonus episodes, I think we have like over 15 now that are released. We have over 15 that are in production. And once season 2 starts releasing, we're just going to keep going. So there's not going to be much of a gap, if at all, with content, because we have so much story we want to tell. We're trying to collect it all at once. So once the horse has left the gate, it's gonna keep going.
Yeah,
great to know.
Cool. Yeah, the model that we released season 1 in was not one that would last. So we designed a different model for production.
That was more like, can we do this? Like, what is podcast? What the heck are we doing? That's what it was season 1. Now, okay, we're doing this, so we need to do it right.
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially, you've taken some time to look at what you did with season 1, and you've looked at it and thought, so what did we do right with season 1? What can we learn from it? And how can we step up from that?
Yeah, exactly. And and most importantly, how can we do it so that there's a lot of chainsaws in the air with this juggling act. And when we were doing season 1, we couldn't do it all at once. We couldn't build that body of work, the bonus episodes under the Patreon. And if people were interested in having different content set in the same universe, and if they would go there, they'd only see 1 or 2 things, and we weren't keeping up to date with it. And because we were so busy writing and producing at the same time on the other end. And so it was like, okay, we need to build a body of work here while we are writing this, and we're not going to be writing episodes as we are recording other episodes. We're going to gather all the scripts, and it was just one of those, when you do a narrative, you have to plan ahead for the long run. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
You can find pods like us on any streaming platform mentioned: Apple Music, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Good Pods, anywhere you can find podcast. We have a Patreon as well, if you just look for Pods Like Us on Patreon. And also contact us through podslikeus@gmail.com. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.